The jungle of Seven was unlike anything Laura had ever seen. The air was thick with humidity, and every breath felt heavy in her lungs. Strange sounds echoed around her, shrill cries from unseen creatures, the rustling of leaves as something slithered through the underbrush, and the occasional deep rumble that seemed to come from the ground itself. She adjusted the strap of her rifle, glancing over at Jack, who walked a few paces ahead of her. His face was tense, his eyes scanning the dense foliage for any sign of danger. They had been sent here by their government to explore this alien planet, a place rumored to be teeming with life and death. Their mission was simple: gather data about the environment and report back. But nothing about this world felt simple. Every step they took seemed to carry the weight of unseen threats lurking just beyond their sight. Laura wiped sweat from her brow and glanced upward. The canopy above them was so thick that only fragments of sunlight managed to filter through, casting eerie shadows on the forest floor. She could feel her heart pounding in her chest, not just from the physical exertion, but from the constant tension of being surrounded by the unknown. "Stay sharp," Jack muttered, his voice low. "We don't know what's out here." Laura nodded, though she didn't reply. Her mind was already racing with questions. What kind of creatures lived in this jungle? Were they hostile? Could they even communicate with humans? She pushed those thoughts aside, focusing instead on the task at hand. They needed to stay alert, or they might not make it back alive. As they moved deeper into the jungle, the sounds around them grew louder, more chaotic. Birds screeched overhead, their calls almost deafening. Insects buzzed incessantly, some so large that Laura could see their wings flapping as they darted past. She shuddered involuntarily, trying to shake off the feeling of unease that clung to her like the damp air. Then suddenly Jack stopped. He held up a hand, signaling for her to do the same. Laura froze, her fingers tightening around her rifle. She scanned the area, searching for whatever had caught his attention. At first, she saw nothing unusual, just trees, vines, and the occasional patch of moss-covered rocks. But then movement caught her eye. There, near a fallen tree trunk, was a small creature. It was crouched low to the ground, its body trembling slightly. Its scales shimmered faintly in the dim light, a deep emerald green that seemed almost otherworldly. Laura squinted, taking a cautious step forward. The creature looked young, perhaps no older than a cub. Its large, golden eyes were wide with fear, and its tiny claws dug into the dirt beneath it. "It's just a baby," Laura whispered, lowering her rifle. She couldn't explain why, but something about the creature tugged at her heart. Maybe it was the way it whimpered softly, or the way its thin frame seemed so fragile. Whatever it was, she felt an overwhelming urge to protect it. Jack frowned, keeping his weapon raised. "Be careful, Laura. We don't know what it is." But Laura wasn't listening. She took another step closer, her movements slow and deliberate. The creature didn't move, though its breathing quickened. She knelt down a few feet away, her hands held out in front of her to show she meant no harm. "It's okay," she said softly, her voice barely audible over the jungle noise. "I'm not going to hurt you." For a moment it seemed like the creature might relax. Its trembling eased slightly, and it tilted its head, studying her with curious eyes. Laura smiled faintly, reaching out a hand toward it. Just as her fingers brushed against its scales, a deafening roar shattered the silence. Both Laura and Jack spun around, their weapons raised. Emerging from the shadows was a massive figure, a towering alien warrior clad in armor made of bone and metal. His body was covered in scars, evidence of countless battles fought and won. His golden eyes burned with fury as he locked onto the scene before him, the cub cowering beside Laura and Laura herself, kneeling too close for comfort. Without hesitation, the warlord acted. With a swift kick, he sent the cub flying across the clearing, its small body slamming into the base of a tree. Laura gasped, her stomach twisting with anger and disbelief. How could anyone treat a defenseless creature like that? "Laura, get back!" Jack shouted, stepping between her and the warlord. His finger hovered over the trigger of his rifle, ready to fire if necessary. But Laura didn't retreat. Instead, she rushed to the cub's side, scooping it up gently despite its weak struggles. It was heavier than she expected, but she didn't care. All that mattered was protecting it from further harm. She cradled it against her chest, glaring defiantly at the warlord. The alien barked something in a guttural language neither of them understood, but the meaning was clear. Leave the cub alone or suffer the consequences. Laura tightened her grip on the creature, her jaw set in determination. "You're not hurting it again," she said firmly, her voice cutting through the tension like a blade. The warlord roared in response, lunging forward with terrifying speed. Jack fired a warning shot into the ground, hopping to deter him, but the alien didn't stop. He swiped at Laura with one massive claw, aiming to rip the cub from her arms. In that split second, something inside Laura snapped. She ducked under his swing, using her momentum to twist sideways. Then, driven by pure instinct, she grabbed hold of his leg and yanked with all her strength. There was a sickening crack, followed by a howl of pain as the warlord's leg tore free from its socket. Still holding the cub tightly, Laura stood her ground, her chest heaving with exertion. The warlord staggered back, clutching the stump where his leg used to be. For a long moment, no one moved. The jungle seemed to hold its breath, waiting to see what would happen next. Finally, the warlord's gaze met Laura's. There was no mistaking the shock in his eyes or the flicker of respect that followed. Slowly, he lowered his remaining arm, his posture shifting from aggression to something else entirely. Laura didn't know what to call it, but she knew one thing for certain: the situation had changed. And so had she. The warlord's roar echoed through the jungle, a sound so raw and primal that it sent shivers down Laura's spine. She stood frozen for a moment, her arms still wrapped protectively around the cub. Its tiny body trembled against her chest, its golden eyes wide with fear. Jack was shouting something behind her, his voice sharp and urgent, but Laura couldn't tear her gaze away from the towering alien in front of her. The warlord's massive form loomed over them, his armor glinting faintly in the dappled sunlight. His remaining leg buckled slightly under his weight, blood pooling on the ground where his other limb had been ripped away. Despite his injury, he radiated power, his claws flexing as if ready to strike again at any moment. His golden eyes burned with fury, though there was something else there too, something Laura couldn't quite place. "Laura, put it down," Jack yelled again, his rifle trained on the warlord. "We can't fight him, he'll kill us." But Laura didn't move. Her grip tightened instinctively around the cub, her mind racing. She knew Jack was right, they were outnumbered, outmatched. This creature could crush them both without breaking a sweat. Yet she couldn't bring herself to let go. The cub whimpered softly, nuzzling closer to her as if seeking comfort. In that moment, Laura felt an unshakable resolve take hold of her. She wouldn't abandon it, no matter what. The warlord barked another guttural command, pointing one clawed finger toward the cub. His tone was harsh, demanding, but Laura ignored him. Instead, she took a cautious step forward, keeping her eyes locked on his. It was a bold move, perhaps even reckless, but she hoped it might communicate her intentions. She wasn't here to fight. She just wanted to protect the cub. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. Then, with startling speed, the warlord lunged. Laura barely had time to react. She twisted sideways, dodging his swipe by inches. His claws grazed the air where she'd been standing, leaving deep gouges in the dirt. Adrenaline surged through her veins, sharpening her senses. Without thinking, she grabbed onto his arm, using his own momentum against him. With a strength she didn't know she possessed, she yanked hard, pulling him off balance. The warlord stumbled, his injured leg giving way beneath him. He crashed to the ground with a deafening thud, shaking the earth beneath their feet. For a moment, everything went silent. Even the jungle seemed to pause, holding its breath as the warlord lay there, stunned. Laura's heart pounded wildly in her chest. She glanced down at the cub, ensuring it was still safe, before turning her attention back to the fallen alien. Slowly, carefully, she approached him. Every instinct screamed at her to run, to put as much distance between herself and this dangerous creature as possible. But she stayed rooted to the spot, her resolve unwavering. The warlord groaned, lifting his head weakly. His golden eyes met hers, and for the first time Laura saw something besides anger. There was pain there, yes, but also confusion, and maybe even a flicker of respect. He stared at her for a long moment, his expression unreadable, before finally lowering his gaze. "Jack," Laura said quietly, her voice steady despite the chaos swirling inside her. "Lower your weapon." "What?" Jack hissed, his finger still hovering over the trigger. "Are you crazy? He'll kill us." "No, he won't," Laura replied firmly. She turned to face Jack, her eyes pleading. "Trust me." Jack hesitated, torn between loyalty to his partner and the overwhelming urge to survive. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, he lowered his rifle slightly, though he kept it close at hand. "This better not get us killed," he muttered under his breath. Laura nodded, then turned back to the warlord. She knelt beside him, placing the cub gently on the ground. The little creature whimpered again, crawling toward the warlord with hesitant steps. Laura watched as it nuzzled against his armored side, eliciting a low growl from the wounded alien. Despite his injuries, he wrapped a protective arm around the cub, pulling it close. For a moment the scene almost felt peaceful, a father guarding his child, even in the face of unimaginable pain. But Laura knew better than to let her guard down completely. This was still an alien world, and these creatures were far from human. Still, she couldn't deny the connection she felt to the cub, and strangely enough to the warlord himself. The alien's gaze shifted back to Laura, his expression softening ever so slightly. He barked something in his guttural language, gesturing toward the cub. Though Laura couldn't understand his words, his meaning was clear. "Thank you." She nodded slowly, meeting his gaze without flinching. For the first time since they'd arrived on 7, she felt like she was truly understood. Jack cleared his throat, breaking the tense silence. "Okay, now what?" he asked, glancing nervously between Laura and the warlord. "Do we just leave?" Laura shook her head. "Not yet." She looked back at the warlord, her brow furrowing thoughtfully. "He's hurt. We need to help him." "Help him?" Jack repeated incredulously. "After he tried to kill us." "He didn't succeed," Laura pointed out, her tone calm but firm. "And neither did we. Maybe this is our chance to make peace." Jack opened his mouth to argue, but the look on Laura's face stopped him short. He sighed heavily, running a hand through his sweat-drenched hair. "Fine, but if this goes wrong, I'm blaming you." Laura managed a small smile. "Fair enough." With that, she turned her attention back to the warlord. Carefully, she reached into her pack, pulling out a roll of bandages and a small. The warlord tensed visibly, his claws flexing as if preparing to strike. But when Laura placed the supplies on the ground in front of him, he relaxed slightly, watching her with wary curiosity. She worked quickly but methodically, wrapping the stump of his missing leg with clean bandages to stop the bleeding. The warlord winced occasionally but made no move to stop her. When she finished, she sat back on her heels, wiping her hands on her pants. "There," she said softly. "That should help until you can get proper care." The warlord studied her for a long moment, his golden eyes filled with an emotion Laura couldn't quite name. Then, to her surprise, he extended one massive hand toward her, palm open in a gesture of peace. Laura hesitated only briefly before reaching out to meet it. Their hands touched lightly, her small fingers dwarfed by his massive clawed ones. It was a small act, but it carried immense weight. For the first time since arriving on 7, Laura felt like they weren't alone anymore. They had allies here, not friends, not yet, but perhaps the beginnings of something greater. As the warlord pulled his hand back, he let out a low rumble, almost like a purr. The sound sent a strange warmth through Laura's chest, and she found herself smiling despite the danger surrounding them. Whatever came next, she knew one thing for certain. They had taken the first step toward bridging the gap between their worlds. And that was worth every risk. The jungle was quiet now, the earlier chaos replaced by an uneasy stillness. Laura sat cross-legged on the damp ground, her rifle resting beside her. The warlord leaned against a fallen tree trunk, His massive frame slumped slightly as he cradled the cub in one arm. His golden eyes were half closed, though Laura could tell he was still watching her closely. Jack paced nearby, his movements tense and restless, glancing at the alien every few seconds as if expecting another attack. Laura took a deep breath, trying to steady her racing thoughts. What had just happened? She had faced down a creature that could have killed her with a single swipe of its claws, and instead they had somehow reached an understanding. It didn't make sense, not entirely, but she couldn't deny the strange connection she felt to the Warlord and his cub. They weren't enemies anymore, at least not in this moment. The cub squirmed in the Warlord's grip, letting out a soft trill that sounded almost playful. Laura smiled faintly, leaning forward slightly to get a better look. Its emerald green scales shimmered faintly in the dappled sunlight, and its tiny claws dug into the Warlord's armor harmlessly. Despite its earlier injuries, it seemed to be recovering quickly, its energy returning with each passing minute. "You're a fighter, aren't you?" Laura murmured softly, reaching out a hand toward the cub. The Warlord stiffened slightly, his gaze narrowing as he watched her movement. But when the cub stretched its neck toward her, nuzzling her fingers gently, he relaxed again, his expression softening. Jack stopped packing and turned to look at them, his brow furrowed. "What are you doing?" he asked, his voice low but sharp. "You can't trust him, Laura. He's dangerous." "I know," Laura replied without looking away from the cub. "But so are we, and right now we need each other." Jack opened his mouth to argue but closed it again, shaking his head. He didn't understand, not fully, but he trusted Laura enough to let her take the lead. For now, at least. The Warlord rumbled softly, a sound that vibrated through the air like distant thunder. He shifted his weight slightly, wincing as pain shot through his injured leg. Laura noticed immediately, her brow creasing with concern. "We should clean that wound again," she said, gesturing toward the bandages wrapped around the stump of his missing limb. "It'll get infected if we don't." The Warlord hesitated, his claws flexing slightly. Then, after a long moment, he nodded once, his golden eyes meeting hers briefly before dropping back to the cub in his arms. Laura took that as permission and reached for her once more. As she worked, carefully removing the old bandages and replacing them with fresh ones, the Warlord remained perfectly still. His breathing was slow and steady, though Laura could see the tension in his muscles. Every so often, he would glance down at the cub, his expression softening further. It was clear how much he cared for the little creature, how protective he was of it. When Laura finished, she sat back on her heels, wiping her hands on her pants. "That's all I can do for now," she said quietly. "But you'll heal, you're strong." The Warlord tilted his head slightly, studying her with those piercing golden eyes. Then, to her surprise, he reached out with one massive clawed hand, brushing it lightly against her shoulder. The gesture was awkward, hesitant, but unmistakably gentle. Laura froze, her heart skipping a beat. She hadn't expected gratitude, not from him, but it was there, written plainly in his actions. "Okay," Jack said suddenly, breaking the silence. "Now what? We can't just sit here forever. We have a mission to complete." Laura nodded slowly, turning to face him. "You're right, but maybe our mission has changed." Jack frowned, crossing his arms over his chest. "What do you mean?" "We came here to gather information about this planet," Laura explained, her voice calm but firm. "And now we have a chance to learn something truly important, to build a bridge between us and them. If we walk away now, we might never get another opportunity like this." Jack stared at her for a long moment, his jaw tightening. Finally, he sighed heavily, running a hand through his sweat-drenched hair. "Fine, but if this goes sideways, I'm blaming you." Laura managed a small smile. "Fair enough." The Warlord growled softly, drawing their attention back to him. He pointed toward the jungle, then mimicked walking with two fingers. Laura tilted her head, trying to decipher his meaning. "Is he offering to guide us?" she asked aloud. Jack raised an eyebrow. "Or leading us into a trap?" "It's worth the risk," Laura said firmly. She turned to the Warlord, nodding once. Lead the way." The warlord rose slowly to his feet, wincing as he put weight on his remaining leg. He scooped the cub into his arms, cradling it protectively against his chest. Then, with a final glance at Laura and Jack, he began moving deeper into the jungle, his massive form cutting a path through the dense foliage. Laura and Jack followed close behind, their weapons ready but lowered. The jungle seemed different now, less hostile somehow. The strange sounds that had once filled Laura with dread now felt almost comforting, a reminder that they weren't alone in this vast, alien world. As they walked, Laura found herself studying the warlord more closely. His movements were slow and deliberate, careful not to jar the cub too much. Occasionally, he would pause, pointing out certain plants or warning them away from others with sharp gestures. It was clear he knew this land intimately, his knowledge far surpassing anything the humans could have hoped to gather on their own. After several hours of walking, they arrived at a clearing. In the center stood a group of aliens, their forms similar to the warlords but smaller, less imposing. They carried spears and wore armor made of bone and metal, their eyes wary as they watched the approaching humans. The warlord stepped forward, barking something in his guttural language. The others responded with low growls, their gazes flickering between him and the humans. Laura felt her pulse quicken, her hand instinctively moving closer to her rifle. But the warlord placed himself between her and the group, his posture confident and unyielding. "They're his tribe," Laura whispered to Jack, her voice barely audible. "He's introducing us." Jack nodded, though his grip on his weapon didn't loosen. "Let's hope they're friendly." For several tense minutes, the warlord spoke with his people, his tone shifting from commanding to explanatory. The others listened intently, occasionally glancing at Laura and Jack with expressions ranging from curiosity to suspicion. Finally, one of them, a female alien with intricate markings etched into her armor, stepped forward. She extended a clawed hand toward Laura, palm open in a gesture of peace. Laura hesitated only briefly before stepping forward to meet her. Their hands touched lightly, the moment charged with significance. Behind her, Jack let out a shaky breath, lowering his rifle slightly. Whatever doubts he'd had about trusting these creatures seemed to fade, at least for now. The female alien gestured toward the jungle, then toward the warlord and the cub. Laura understood immediately. They were offering shelter, a place to rest and regroup. She nodded gratefully, turning to Jack. "We stay with them tonight," she said. "It's safer than wandering the jungle alone." Jack hesitated, then nodded reluctantly. "All right, but keep your guard up." Laura smiled faintly, her gaze drifting back to the warlord. He stood tall and proud, his golden eyes glowing with determination. Despite everything they'd been through, she couldn't help but feel a sense of hope. These creatures weren't so different from humans, not really. They fought to protect what mattered most, just like anyone else. As the group led them deeper into the jungle, Laura allowed herself a small measure of optimism. Maybe, just maybe, they could find common ground here. And if they did, it might change everything for both their worlds. The alien village was unlike anything Laura had ever seen. It wasn't a collection of huts or tents like she might have expected, but rather a sprawling network of structures carved directly into the jungle itself. Massive trees served as natural pillars, their trunks hollowed out and reinforced with bone and metal to form sturdy shelters. Vines hung from above, woven together to create walls and roofs that blended seamlessly with the environment. The entire place felt alive, as if the jungle had grown around the tribe instead of being pushed aside. Laura walked cautiously behind the warlord, her rifle slung over her shoulder but within easy reach. Jack followed close behind her, his eyes darting nervously between the aliens surrounding them. The tribe's members moved silently, their golden eyes watching the humans with a mix of curiosity and suspicion. Some carried spears tipped with jagged teeth, while others wore armor adorned with intricate patterns that seemed to tell stories of battles fought and won. The female alien who had greeted them earlier led the way, her movements graceful and deliberate. She stopped in front of one of the larger tree shelters, gesturing for Laura and Jack to enter. Inside, the space was surprisingly spacious, with soft moss covering the ground and glowing fungi lining the walls, casting a faint light throughout the room. The air smelled earthy, tinged with the scent of damp leaves and something vaguely metallic. "This is impressive," Laura murmured, glancing around. She turned to the Warlord who stood just inside the doorway, still cradling the cub protectively. "Thank you." The Warlord nodded once, his expression unreadable. Then he handed the cub to one of the other aliens, a younger male, and stepped back outside, motioning for Laura and Jack to follow him. They exchanged a quick glance before doing so, unsure of what came next. Outside, the Warlord pointed toward the jungle, then mimicked holding a weapon and firing it. Laura frowned, trying to understand. "Is he asking about our guns?" she asked aloud. Jack shrugged. "Maybe, or maybe he wants us to teach them how to use them." Laura shook her head. "No, I don't think so. He seems smarter than that." She turned to the Warlord, pointing at herself and Jack, then making a gesture as if typing on an invisible keyboard. "Data," she said clearly. "We're here to gather information." The Warlord tilted his head, studying her intently. Then he barked something to the female alien, who nodded and disappeared into one of the nearby shelters. Moments later, she returned carrying a strange device made of twisted vines and shards of crystal. She held it out to Laura, her clawed hands steady despite the weight. Laura hesitated, then took the device carefully. It pulsed faintly in her hands, emitting a low hum that vibrated through her fingers. She looked up at the Warlord, her brow furrowed. "What is this?" He didn't answer verbally, but his golden eyes gleamed with understanding. Instead, he gestured toward the jungle again, then tapped the side of his head. Laura stared at him for a moment before realization dawned. "You want us to share knowledge," she said slowly, "to trade information." The Warlord nodded, his expression softening slightly. Laura felt a surge of excitement mixed with apprehension. This was exactly what they'd hoped for, a chance to learn more about this world and its inhabitants. But it also meant trusting these creatures completely, something neither she nor Jack had been prepared to do when they first arrived. "All right," Laura said finally, turning to Jack. "Let's do this." Over the next few days, Laura and Jack worked closely with the tribe, sharing what little they could about human technology and science. They explained basic concepts like electricity and engineering, using simple gestures and drawings etched into the dirt. In return, the aliens taught them about the jungle, how to identify edible plants, avoid dangerous predators, and navigate the dense terrain without getting lost. Laura found herself growing closer to the Warlord, who had begun accompanying her on short excursions into the jungle. At first, their interactions were limited to practical matters, pointing out landmarks, warning her away from certain areas. But gradually, they began to communicate in other ways, through shared glances, small gestures, and even laughter when one of them stumbled over a particularly tricky explanation. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and the jungle grew dark, Laura sat near a fire with the Warlord. The flames cast flickering shadows across his face, highlighting the lines of pain and resilience etched into his features. Beside him lay the cub, now fully recovered and playful, chasing after glowing insects that flitted around the firelight. "You remind me of him," Laura said softly, nodding toward the cub. "Protective, strong." The Warlord tilted his head, his golden eyes meeting hers. Then he reached out, brushing his clawed hand lightly against her arm. The gesture startled her, not because it hurt, but because it was so gentle, so deliberate. For a moment, neither of them spoke, the crackling fire filling the silence between them. Jack watched from a distance, leaning against a tree with his arms crossed. He had been quieter since arriving at the village, his usual sharp comments replaced by thoughtful stares. When Laura caught his eye, he gave her a small nod, his expression unreadable. She knew he still had doubts about trusting the tribe, but he hadn't voiced them in days. Maybe, she thought, He was starting to see what she saw, that these creatures weren't so different from them after all. Their newfound alliance was tested sooner than anyone expected. On the fourth day, as Laura and Jack were helping the tribe repair one of their shelters, a low rumble echoed through the jungle. The sound was distant at first, almost imperceptible, but it grew louder with each passing second. The aliens froze, their golden eyes widening in alarm. "What is that?" Jack asked, gripping his rifle tightly. Before anyone could answer, the source of the noise became clear. A pack of predators emerged from the trees, their sleek black bodies blending seamlessly with the shadows. They were smaller than the Warlord but faster, their sharp teeth glinting in the dim light. There were at least a dozen of them, circling the village with predatory precision. The Warlord let out a deafening roar, stepping forward to shield Laura and Jack. His tribe followed suit, raising their spears and forming a defensive line around the humans. Laura tightened her grip on her rifle, her heart pounding wildly in her chest. "Stay close," she whispered to Jack, though she doubted he needed the reminder. The predators lunged simultaneously, their movements swift and deadly. Chaos erupted as the tribe fought back, their spears flashing in the firelight. Laura fired her rifle, aiming carefully to avoid hitting any of the aliens. Each shot echoed like thunder, startling the predators momentarily but not stopping them entirely. Just when it seemed like the tide might turn against them, the Warlord charged forward, wielding a massive spear forged from bone and crystal. With a single, powerful swing, he impaled one of the predators, sending it crashing to the ground. The others hesitated, their glowing red eyes flickering with uncertainty. Seizing the opportunity, the tribe launched a coordinated counterattack, driving the remaining predators back into the jungle. When the battle ended, the clearing was eerily silent. Bodies of the predators lay scattered across the ground, their black scales glinting faintly in the moonlight. The tribe gathered together, their breathing heavy but triumphant. The Warlord approached Laura and Jack, his chest heaving with exertion. Blood streaked his armor, but his golden eyes burned with pride. "You saved us," Laura said, her voice trembling. "Thank you." The Warlord placed a hand on her shoulder, his grip firm but gentle. Then he turned to the tribe, barking something in his guttural language. The others responded with low growls, their expressions filled with respect and gratitude. Laura realized then that their bond had shifted, not just between her and the Warlord, but between all of them. They were allies now, united by shared danger and mutual trust. As the night wore on, the tribe celebrated their victory with a feast of roasted meat and glowing fruits harvested from the jungle. Laura sat beside the Warlord, laughing quietly as the cub tugged playfully at her boot. Jack joined them eventually, his usual tension replaced by a rare smile. For the first time since arriving on 7, they felt like they belonged. And though their mission wasn't over yet, Laura knew they had already achieved something remarkable. They had bridged the gap between two worlds, proving that even the allies could find common ground. The days passed quickly after the battle, each one blending into the next as Laura and Jack settled deeper into life with the tribe. The jungle no longer felt like a hostile place, it had become their home. The Warlord, whose name they learned was through gestures and shared moments, became a constant presence in their lives. He taught them how to track prey, identify medicinal plants, and even craft tools from the bones of fallen creatures. In return, Laura and Jack continued to share what they could about human technology, drawing diagrams in the dirt, or using simple demonstrations to explain concepts like electricity and machinery. Laura found herself spending more time with than she expected. His quiet strength and protective nature reminded her of someone who would do anything for those he cared about. She admired that about him, even if she couldn't fully understand his world. The cub, which referred to as Flicker because of the faint glow its scales emitted at night, had grown noticeably stronger and more adventurous. It often followed Laura around the village, nuzzling her hand or tugging at her pack with playful curiosity. Jack, too, had changed. Gone was the sharp-tongued soldier who doubted every decision. Instead, he had become quieter, more thoughtful, observing the tribe's way of life with a mix of respect and wonder. He still kept his rifle close, but it stayed slung over his shoulder more often than not. One evening, as they sat by the fire watching Flicker chase glowing insects, Jack spoke up unexpectedly. "I never thought I'd say this," he began, his voice low but steady, "but maybe we're not so different from them." Laura glanced at him, surprised by the admission. "What made you change your mind?" Jack shrugged, poking at the fire with a stick. "I don't know. Maybe it's seeing how much they care about each other, or how willing they are to fight for what matters. It reminds me of us." Laura smiled faintly, turning her gaze back to Flicker. "Yeah, maybe we're not as alone out here as we thought." Their time with the tribe wasn't without challenges. Supplies were running low, and their communication remained limited to gestures and crude drawings. But despite these obstacles, they managed to form a bond that transcended language. The aliens trusted them enough to let them participate in daily tasks, while Laura and Jack did everything they could to contribute to the tribe's survival. One morning, as the sun filtered through the dense canopy above, approached Laura with a serious expression. He pointed toward the sky, then mimicked the shape of a ship with his hands. Laura's heart sank. She knew what he meant. Their shuttle would soon return to retrieve them, ending their stay on 7. They had known this day would come, but neither of them had prepared for how hard it would be to leave. That evening, Laura gathered her things quietly, packing only the essentials. She didn't have much, just her weapon, a few tools, but each item felt heavier than it should. Jack noticed her mood and tried to lighten it with a joke, but his words fell flat. Even Flicker seemed restless, packing around her feet as if sensing something was wrong. When the moment came to say goodbye, the entire tribe gathered in the clearing. Stood at the front, his golden eyes fixed on Laura. The female alien who had first welcomed them stepped forward, holding out a small pendant carved from the same material as armor. It was shaped like a crescent moon, etched with intricate patterns that caught the light. "For you," she said softly, though her voice was rough and guttural. Laura took the pendant carefully, her fingers trembling slightly. "Thank you," she whispered, clutching it tightly in her hand. Stepped closer, placing a clawed hand on her shoulder. For a long moment they simply looked at each other, no words needed to convey the depth of their connection. Then, slowly, extended his other hand, palm open in the gesture of peace they had shared before. Laura mirrored the action, her own hand trembling as it touched his. Flicker darted forward suddenly, rubbing against Laura's leg one last time before retreating to side. Laura knelt down, stroking the cub's shimmering scales gently. "Take care of yourself," she murmured, her voice thick with emotion. "You're going to be a great leader someday." As she rose to her feet, Jack placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "It's time," he said quietly. Laura nodded, taking one final look at the tribe before turning toward the jungle where their shuttle waited. The journey back was quiet, both of them lost in thought. When they reached the clearing where the shuttle had landed, its sleek metal frame gleamed under the sunlight. The pilot greeted them warmly, asking how their mission had gone. Laura hesitated, glancing at Jack before answering. "It was unforgettable," she said finally, her voice soft but certain. "We learned things we never expected to." As the shuttle lifted off, Laura pressed her face against the window, staring down at the shrinking jungle below. She could just make out the shapes of the tribe standing together, watching the ship disappear into the sky. Her fingers closed around the pendant hanging from her neck, its weight grounding her in the memories of everything they had experienced. For weeks after returning to Earth, Laura couldn't stop thinking about 7. The jungle, the tribe, and Flicker, they all felt impossibly far away, yet vivid in her mind. She wrote reports detailing their findings, emphasizing the importance of building bridges with alien civilizations. Though some dismissed her ideas as idealistic, others listened, intrigued by the possibilities. Late one night, as she sat alone in her quarters, Laura held the pendant up to the light. Its surface shimmered faintly, reflecting the stars visible through her window. She smiled softly, feeling a sense of peace wash over her. Whatever challenges lay ahead, she knew one thing for certain: their connection with people had changed her, and perhaps humanity itself, forever. And somewhere out there, amidst the endless expanse of space, was a world where two vastly different species had found common ground. It was a beginning, fragile but hopeful proof that even in the vastness of the universe, understanding and trust could take root. Laura leaned back in her chair, closing her eyes as the pendant rested against her chest. Someday, she hoped, they would meet again. Until then, she carried the memory of 7 with her, a spark of hope in the darkness of the unknown.